Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCG live codes, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code OmniPoke. For today's video, we're going to be going over the results over in Sacramento. This is a regional tournament with over 1,700 players, and it's the first tournament in the Surging Sparks metagame. I'm heading out to Stuttgart on Friday morning because there is a regional there over in Europe, so we are going to be also getting to test out the Surging Sparks stuff for the first time. Let's have a look at how the day one metagame shaped up, with Surging Sparks being a strange set, really, where there's a lot of supplementary cards coming into deck lists rather than like brand new archetypes. I think most of the time we're going to see the likes of like Slacking, Ceruledge, Archaludon, Hydreigon. These sorts of archetypes are going to be like not top tier threats and not going to be that popular really in terms of metagame analysis, as you can see from the graphic. I think the kind of biggest impact is going to be the Lost Zone box, with Pikachu EX being a really solid attacking option within that list, and then also notably will be Miraidon with the upgrade actually of Magneton, but also Pikachu as well to an extent. So those are really the updates from Surging Sparks, I suppose, but there are a few other really cool things in terms of going inside the top tier deck list that you're looking at right now, but also some other budding archetypes, which I think we definitely have to take a look at. So the day one meta analysis was really weird because this is only the top 6 decks only made up for 52% of the overall field, which means people had no freaking clue what to play, and we're in a really wide format right now with probably a number of like 3 and 4% play rates of all sorts of archetypes. I think it's really important to note that Lugia Archeops is chilling at 5th spot, whereas in the last few tournaments it's been like in that top 3 quite consistently, almost always touching towards that like 10% threshold. And I think reasonably so, Lugia is going to be far more worried in this format with the Fear of Pikachu Lost Zone box, which did make a resurgence, as well as now Miraidon, which, spoilers, was the 2 decks both in final. So Lugia, rightfully so, is going to still be a meta deck, no doubt, but be a bit more of a risk, whereas I think in previous formats, like in the Stellar Crown formats, there was nothing for Lugia to fear other than itself, you know? So now it actually has some matchups to truly fear, I think, which is interesting. Regidrago, for the first time in a while, actually was the most played deck, and it's been the best deck throughout Stellar Crown and was never the most played, which is bizarre. But Raging Bolt continues to be 11%. Raging Bolt inherently doesn't have to care about Pikachu too much because it already has that Slitherwing. Regidrago doesn't have to care about Pikachu because it's got Kyurem if it's a Lost Zone build, but also has Cologne and Dragapult. You know, it has so many ways to get around Peak that neither of those decks really care about the new edition. Charizard, you know, it can play Cologne if it really wants to. It's got Dusknoir at the very least and all that other stuff. So, yeah, Charizard chilling at that 8%. Didn't really gain anything new from this set. Like, maybe some people will try Trolley out, but I still think that there's Unfair Stamp, there's Box, there's Hero's Cape. All of these cards are, like, reasonable in Zard, to be honest. It feels like we've been flirting with the A-Spec for a while with this archetype, and again, we'll see some of that today. But yeah, Lost Zone Box did show up for a number of players. You still have to fear Regidrago, of course. So it's still a risky archetype, but I think Pikachu does beat so much nonsense that just doesn't respect its ability that it's still going to be a valid archetype and probably will continue to be on that day one graphic, even though it didn't have like the best conversion or the best overall placement. I think there was like a top 64 placements for Lost Zone Box, but not like droves of them in the top tables. So it's still a difficult archetype to play, and it's a difficult sell in terms of choosing this archetype because of Regidrago. And then Gardevoir like lines up our 6th position. Kind of interesting that Terapagos isn't on our day one meta. It has been in and out of the day one meta, but usually had like very good conversion throughout all of Stellar Crown. Although Terapagos is one of the archetypes that does have to be concerned with Pikachu a little bit. So that's something to bear in mind. And then Palkia as well, I guess, to an extent, although it probably is already maining Cologne in whichever build you play. So, yeah, and it even has like Greninja EX, which could be pretty decent into Peak just because of its size and stuff. So I think Palkia doesn't have anything to necessarily fear, but just something to bear in mind there. I think just already looking towards Stuttgart, it's likely that these will continue to be the top 6 in play, but maybe Gardevoir and Miraidon sort of switch. I think Miraidon could, you know, after having such a barnstorming performance, make at least 5% and sort of make that push, and then like positionally, like maybe Lugia goes to the bottom of this graphic at best, and then there's like a debate whether Terapagos comes back in a different form that we'll talk about later, which I'm really excited about. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's look at the day 2 analysis, and it's 5 of the 6 same decks, whereas Golden Go makes it onto the graphic over Lugia, which sort of fell out that little bit. But the positioning of all the other decks are the same, and essentially the story is that the meta decks, you know, the 52% rather than the 48%, which were not on the graphic, are the most powerful strategies available, the meta decks, you know. So the fact that they basically all gained percentage basically said, don't play nonsense new stuff from Surging Sparks, keep playing these decks with maybe some changes, I suppose, which may again be an indication of how this set like shapes up. But there are a number of decks that we have to look at today. Obviously, the tournament structure's changed, where now 304 players made it into day 2 of this tournament, and that's because 5-2-1 records were able to progress you into that second day of the tournament, and you could continue playing those additional rounds trying to bolster your record for your overall points and prizing and whatnot. So that's pretty interesting to see. It was Landon Kettler coming away with the win with Miraidon, second regional placement, and quite a few solid placements as well over the last few years. So definitely a strong player, bringing a very cool build of Miraidon back to the table. I think it's clear to see that the Magneton is the big component here that changes the fortunes of this archetype. Even though it's just a 1-1 line, you obviously had Tandem Unit to cherry pick the Magnemite early game, and the Overvolt Discharge is such a powerful ability for an archetype like this. You don't care that you're giving away a single prize because your deck is, other than this card, all 2-prize Pokemon, so it often won't help the opponent too much, and it means that you can get a huge burst of acceleration onto the board, which means you can have alternate avenues if your generators aren't hitting, or if they are, you just have a continued chain of attacks no matter what. When you're already playing the Area 0 Underdepths, you can go very wide on the board. That means that you can weave in Raikou as an even better attacker than normal. It means that you can use the new Latias EX as well, which is another great like space cheating card for this archetype, where you now have free retreat on all your basic Pokemon. That was like a small issue of this archetype previously, where you only had a handful of outs at times into certain matchups that could go like Iono Countercatcher setup prizes, like certainly Drago that's going to try and disrupt and do like a Dragapult play that can sometimes take like 4 prize turns, or if they're doing like Kyurem swings and stuff like that whilst trapping, you now have easy ways around that, which I think is really important, and it means that you don't just have to play switch cards at all in the deck list. And in fact, it was just the Arven rescue board, searchable option to get these 1-retreaters out the way, but then the Latias, for the most part, is going to be like leading the way to pivot between your Pokemon, Iron Hands being obviously that chunky 4-retreat cost Mon, which is sometimes going to be trap bait at times. But yeah, Miraidon, definitely a consistent performer, has all the engine Pokemon, and of course Tandem Unit itself is an engine, and then you have decent KO potential with Raikou and Miraidon, Iron Hands being that incredible option to deal with the single prize stuff, and then because of Magneton now, Raichu V can make its way back into the deck to have like a turn of burst damage with Dynamic Spark, which can definitely be handy into the V-Star matchup, so you can have like a 1-hit KO turn in that regard. And then maybe if everything's gone perfectly, you can do the same thing into a stage 2, but oftentimes you're going to be looking to like use hands a bunch in those matchups anyway. I've toyed around with this list a little bit, and there's going to be a video of it tomorrow on the channel. I really do like the 60. I think the one question mark I have is like 4-boss and Countercatcher. It seems really, really high for a deck that wants to have the game be only 3 turns always. So having 5 Gusting cards, as well as like, Secret Box, Luminion, all these Ultra Balls, the Fez and the Mew, like you have a lot of draw. So I don't feel like it's a matter of just like, I need to hit them because I'm going to have low odds. You actually have high odds to see all this stuff because of how the deck is constructed. So even if you cut the boss, most likely, down to 3, I think that could be a space just towards like Ultra Ball to just give you more get me into the game style cards. That would be the only thing that I would look at here. One thing to mention is that Landon came out and said that this is predominantly a go first deck when you're going blind into the matchup, and then it's really only into the racing basic matchups where you will opt second. Most of the time you are opting first just so you can get those guaranteed attachments, just so you can like get your early Tandem Unit in and that other stuff and get yourself prepped for a boss on turn 2, rather than like having to do everything all in one turn because you've gone second. So that's just a small note there that you are quite happy going first with this archetype, mostly by virtue of how many other decks want to go first themselves. Congrats also to Kenneth, who made the finals with a very different build, actually, in Miraidon. There's a lot of similarities here in that it's still utilizing like a ton of the one-off Pokemon, obviously incorporating Magneton and the Latias as the big inclusions. But you'll notice that there's 3 Irida rather than 4 Arven in the 60. So opting to have Irida means you have like less likelihood of an early game Forest, which I do think is a really important piece because that gets you guaranteed Generator, which is really huge, especially when you've gone second. But it does give this archetype extra push potential every turn with with Radiant Greninja, because you're playing 16 energy, you know, you're often going to have floating energy, and it also helps the speed of a turn 2 Magneton if you need to go down that direction, whilst also having the utility of Bundle or Luminion, which are also just like good cards to have as and when you need them. I think I'm probably going to land on like a middle ground between the two, to be honest, where I have like 1 or 2 copies of Irida maximum, definitely bring Greninja back into the list, and then still have Arven, because I do think Forest Hill Stone is still like integral to the overall consistency of this archetype. A few other small tweaks, the Blood Moon Ursaluna has made it into this 60, essentially just giving you more license to go like all in on a Raichu play, throw all your energy and know that a Blood Moon can be your final couple prizes in a lot of instances. And then there's also the Rotom V, which again leans into this narrative of Miraidon is happy going first. That's going to be even more so the case if you can end on a Rotom 3-card draw and then set yourself up once again towards like generators whilst bossing from like turn 2 onwards to just make sure you're taking out priority multi-prize threats. One small note is that Landon played the 50 hit point Magnemite that can attach energies from the discard pile. I've already played around with this archetype a lot, and I've used that attack already a lot. It's like a Motivate from Squawk, but you're using a 1-prizer. And when things don't align, you will use that attack. So I actually prefer using Landon's copy of Magnemite rather than this random one. Just a tiny note there, but I thought it was worth mentioning because it's already come up in a number of my games. Victor brought Goldengo to a top 4 placement. It feels like this archetype just always finds a way to spike tournaments these days. In this occasion, it's going to be incorporating a few new cards from Surging Spark, the A-Spec, of course, being one of the big ones here. Energy Search Pro allows you to search your deck for any number of basic energy of different types, reveal them, put them into your hand, and then shuffle your deck. And as you can see, we're playing the whole heap of energy types, so this one Irida or this one Cypher Maniac can get you the A-Spec. That one E-Search Pro means you're throwing, you know, immediately 350 damage at whatever's in front of you if need be, so it just allows you to have a lot more speed in the deck and allows you to cheat a little bit of space in a way, because you have to play far fewer vessels, knowing that the E-Search Pro is just busted, and then from then on you are relying on the superiors to carry on your attacks throughout the late game. And that space that you've freed up by no longer playing Palkia, because you want to have a huge number of different energy types rather than having like lots of water so you can Palkia consistently. Instead, it tries to cheat its prize map via the 1/1 line of Togekiss. Again, just a very quick thing. If you do have access to the other Togepi, the one that can heal 10, that's way better because it helps skew the math that a Dragapult or a Regidrago player will use against you. It can deny a 4-prize swing over 2 turns from a Dragapult spam. But it is mostly about the Wonder Kiss ability here from Togekiss. When your opponent's Pokemon is knocked out, you can flip a coin of heads, take an extra prize card. Very scary text for certain, but because this archetype cycles a lot with Pokestop, has coin bonus, and most importantly has Cypher Maniac, you can get this out in a modest amount of time. You know, you already have the Poffins as well and such, so you can search this Togepi pretty easily alongside your Gimmighoul. And the idea is that if you have like 2 attacks where Togekiss is online, you often only need that 1 prize, so you have 2 chances to hit 1 heads essentially. And that really helps Goldengo, where it's an archetype that oftentimes can't afford to be bossing all that often. This list has 1 Countercatcher, 1 boss, but your priority is normally trying to find multiple Goldengo just to get your bonuses online, but also like if you're going to search an item, it's oftentimes going to be the E-Search Pro. Even if you are behind on prizes with Countercatcher, it's unlikely you have enough energy in your hand to do anything with it, so it's really important to E-Search Pro early, and even if it's just taking a single prize KO, it means that you know Togekiss being built in the back can rectify that situation. And actually it's similar to how like a Ceruledge EX will use Briar in the late game to fix the fact that it has to just research all the time. This is a different way of going about it with Goldengo. Initially, I was like really skeptical of moving away from the Palkia V-Star tried and trusted build of Goldengo, but it does look like that Goldengo can very easily just stick to a 3-attack game plan whilst representing a single prize board on turn 1, and that just like is inherently really good against other stuff that doesn't play Briar and doesn't have Dusknoir at their own disposal. It's hard for these other decks that just like want to be aggressive, taking 2 prizes a turn. Goldengo wins that race very often, so you can see how it's gone far in the tournament. And then the remaining archetypes in our top 9, or because there was an asymmetrical cut, are Regidragos, and then the deck that lost out in top 8 was the Charizard Pidgeot. So lots of Regidrago. Once again, Steel feels like it's the best deck in format, being played always by really high-level players as well, which is an indication that you have game plans into every matchup. As long as you can navigate them correctly, utilize your resources correctly, Regidrago will take you far. But I do suppose also worth noting is that the other decks that made top cuts may just be inherently strong into the Drago because they all fell and made these other archetypes rise to the top. So Grant Shen, Isaiah Williams, and even Ryan Antonucci with a top 32 placement had really good placements with the exact same 60 here. Really interesting changes, actually. It seems like they predicted less Lugia because they've cut the Jamming Tower plus Temple of Sinnoh combination that we've seen for so long in Drago, and instead just went for a Pokestop, which is just a general consistency card, rather than like a utility tech. But I also think you no longer have to play the Jamming Tower because the Alolan Exeggutor EX has made it into the deck. I think this is the go-to option against Raging Bolts, possibly even Miraidons now, and to some extent some Terrapagos players as well. Obviously, you're only announcing this attack if your opponent has a multi-prize basic in the active as well as on the bench, but that effect can be pretty powerful, and Tropical Frenzy can come up as well. It's a fairly handy option against Iron Thorns. And just generally, if like you have to take a single prize KO, it's not the worst thing in the world. It can help you ration those energy switches later on in the game as well. One thing that's pretty cool about the Alolan Exeggutor is it's a Terra Pokemon, so it coming into the deck over Dragapult is sort of mitigated by the fact that you have Terra Orb in here as well. So Terra Orb can search out Ogerpon, Dragapult, and Alolan Egg in the list. So even though you're reducing the number of Dragapult in the 60, because the Terra Orb is in here trying to like be the catch-all card, it does sort of give you a little bit of a safety net and allows you to cheat space in that regard. Yeah, really cool deck list, and a handful of very strong pilots took it to good placements, so can't question it too much. Brent Tonnison, however, has found the deck for him and sees no reason to change it. So he is once again getting another insane performance with Drago, completely unchanged 60 as well. So shout out to Brent, who's just having an insane world tour once again this season. Joneng also played a really similar concept to Grant and Isaiah and those players, and it looks like the only main difference is that it's added in a couple of the superiors in the list and sort of changed up its recovery options. But again, shout out to John, who's also been like a Drago innovator over the last few formats and has stuck with this archetype to great success. And we've already seen the deck list, but yeah, Grant and Isaiah played the same 60. Congrats to Isaiah on an awesome top 8 placement. So Charizard did make it all the way to that asymmetrical cut, and it looks like it's a no-thrills 60, to be honest with you. No new cards whatsoever. The archetype's doing its same old tricks. And even though there still is a debate around the A-spec, it does seem like the unfair stamp very often still comes out on top as the best choice for Charizard. Looking at some of the cool lists then, Yi Hao Chen was able to get a great placement with Ancient Box. Maybe this archetype's getting a little bit better positioned with Lost Zone Box sort of creeping back into the meta, and you have these really annoying single prize Pokemon. There's even the high roll chance of Fluttermane just blocking them completely. You have both like Raging Bolt and Miraidon now as archetypes that you can like uptrade into. A few really interesting additions in this 60 exactly, in that there is Brute Bonnet in addition to the booster capsules, but also a Binding Mochi in here, which can help either push the Vengeance Fletching or allow you to weave in the Roaring Moon EX a little bit more aggressively, without being in positions where you are forced to Frenzied Gouge. And the One of Dark patch, really interesting, obviously very good for the Roaring Moon, but also allows Petra EX to be a great finisher in the deck as well. And if you remain like Puritan 1 prize for larger periods of the game, and then you drop Petulant, drop Fez, find Patch and whatnot, you can really surprise opponents. Terrapagos did get a nice top 16 placement here from Joshua, and the interesting thing to note here is the 1-1 line of the Regidrago V-Star. I definitely remember seeing Philip Schultz trying this out early on in Stellar Crown, and obviously Terrapagos isn't naturally playing a V-Star power, and it also feels kind of forced to weave in a Forest Seal Stone, so why not have the Regidrago push to see more cards, but also give you access to that discard pile that little bit more consistently. There's also the return of Chen Pao to the top 16. Really interesting list as well, having the 1-1 Palkia V-Star option in here, as well as Luminion, something you don't always see in the Chen Pao deck. Also seeing the Respect for Control, double Cologne, Palpad, and Silene, in addition to the Boss and the Prime Catcher. These are all counts that I'm certain a Snorlax player wasn't expecting. And in fact, I'm sure that a second Cancelling Clone is also really good into a number of the evolving matchups. I still think it's kind of brave to bring Chen Pao to tournaments these days, but at least this is acknowledging the bad matchups of Chen Pao and trying to alleviate them in some way. Nicholas also got a really strong placement with a Turbo Roaring Moon. Couple new additions here, the attacking option of Koraidon, and that Unrelenting Onslaught for 2 colorless deals 30, and if one of your other ancient Pokemon used an attack during your last turn, this does 150 more damage. Of course, the type coverage is one of the main sells here, in that you can KO Pheasantipity, you can KO Terrapagos, and I suppose even more relevant now is that you can deal with all of the attackers in Miraidon. And especially because Turbo Moon is really good at like rebuilding its attackers turn by turn with the patches in addition to Sada, it's nice to have this explosion from a single prize Pokemon in the mid game. Also, this deck is choosing to play the Latias EX, bit of a surprise because you already have the Petulant EX. But by not having to poison your Roaring Moon, again, that can be really helpful into a number of archetypes that hit that 220 threshold rather than 230. So that's a cool thing to see. I'm surprised it's Temple of Sinnoh rather than just an E-Hammer, because you are already a Pokestop deck. I definitely think E-Hammer's just the stronger choice here if you do want to respect the Lugia matchup, or anything else that could be rocking Mist Energy. But I think it's reasonable to sort of give a nod to that matchup not being a good one. And the card that sticks out like a sore thumb is the choice to play Unfair Stamp rather than Prime Catcher, in an archetype like this that wants to be as aggressive as possible, but at the same time, you have those gotcha moments where your opponent is certainly not expecting a Sada into a Stamp. Like, my goodness, that's going to throw people way off course when they're up against Roaring Moon. No one ever expects the hand disruption in this deck, outside of, like, early game Judge. So, yeah, you have a few checkpoints where your opponent just has to keep drawing cards throughout the game as you hurl these disruptors at them, whilst also swinging in sometimes with your single prize card Pokemon. The timing of this card could be really, really beneficial for you to buy possibly multiple turns in games. Joseph was our highest placing Pidgeot control. There are a few towards those top tables. I don't think any new cards came in from this expansion, which is a strange thing to see, and there will be other lists of Pidgeot that we'll look at in a moment that does incorporate some of the new stuff. I was getting ready to scroll past Gardevoir, but then I saw the Rabskull 1-1 package. What is going on here? I mean, it's protection. It is protection at the end of the day. I guess a tiny note for Gardevoir is that if the Dragos are cutting the jamming towers, that's also like a small buff to this archetype, because now they're just going to have a Alolan Executor instead. I don't know. I think the Rabskull's sus, but again, congrats on the performance. Lugia did still manage a top 32 placement. This was the heavy Chinchilla build. Like I said, the deck's still like pretty powerful, but yes, it's a bit of a concern that the Miraidons did as well as they did, and any people picking up Lost Zone Peak is also a concern. One of the other tales of the tournament was Richard and Patrick here, who both got top 32 placements with a really, really cool Clorth Terrapagos trolley deck. As a personal note, I've been trying to make Trolley work, and I actually think one of the most busted things you can do with Trolley is utilize the poison package. Mochi is this huge damage mod, especially combined with Bonnet Sneasler, and the Trolley is a great way to unlock all of that stuff. And it actually has amazing potential with Terrapagos here, where your Unified Beatdown jumps up to 260 with that Mochi, and then it's Poison that's going to be KOing the V-Star Pokemon, which means that you're not activating Pheasantipity EX for opponents. As we know, without Bouffalont, Terrapagos has had a real struggle with the Regidrago matchup, and I think this Poison package definitely does give you a lot of help here. Clorth being the backup attacker, because you can't use Unified Beatdown on turn 1 going second, so instead you go for the Unhinged Scissors. The base output being 180 with the Poison tick, but of course again you have Mochi, you have the Radiant Hisuian Sneasler that you can try and push the damage with there, so it is an attacker that can one-hit KO basic V Pokemon. Not super consistently, but it is something that can come together. It's not just the Trolley that helps make this archetype come together though, it's also the Latias EX. This adds a lot of consistency to a donk approach actually, so this archetype will be opting to go first. The dream scenario is that you can find your Trolley turn 1, usually via the Forest Seal Stone. We do have a good amount of dig with the archetype, of course. We have, the Forest Seal Stone, we have Squawkabilly, and the idea here is that you can retreat for free whatever's in your active position into Oranguru and use its backorder ability to search your deck for 2 tools and put them straight into your hand. The idea being is that you can grab Forest Seal Stone in addition to Ancient Booster Energy Capsule, and even though you've used your retreat for the turn into this Guru, you can then use Petrarunt EX to use its subjugating chains to get your single prize Petrarunt back into the active position, to end your turn on a donk with the Bonnet Sneasler combo to hit up to 80 damage, even on the first turn of the game. It sounds like super wonky and convoluted, but actually playing this archetype, it does come up. And even if you're not donking, this can be a way that you can take prizes on the first turn of the game, firstly without attacking, but also you don't have to find the double turbo energy to get it rolling. You can see that with the Squawkabilly and the 1 Carmine Luminion combo, that this deck is trying to have access to that play when it needs it. Interesting to sort of scroll through the Twitter conversation for this deck as well, where the Briar wasn't really as functional as you may expect. I think the issue with the Briar, of course, is that you're oftentimes using poison to KO stuff, and this deck doesn't play anything like Countercatcher, so you can't really line it up so that Terrapagos can KO something smaller. So really it's only going to come up into some like single prize matchups, and even then it's not that great, so I think Briar is an easy cut in the 60. But beyond that, these guys came up with a really, really creative list, and I'm so happy that Trolley is unlocking archetypes like this. We'll actually have a look at another list later that also utilises the Trolley to a fairly high placement. These are the sort of things that can be unlocked here, where we can play some really wonky combinations, because this 1A spec, provided it's not prized of course, gets us into the setup very, very quickly. And we have just so many abilities that can help us draw and search and switch and do all this other stuff, that you can do like a lot of actions just from one Trolley that gets you into bizarre board states that can actually just like deal with any board that you're presented with. I'm going to be completely honest, I may not have enough time to learn this deck, but it's certainly an archetype that is on my radar over the next couple of days, and I'm going to throw a ton of games in with it. There was also a 4-stage 2 Great Tree archetype that got top 32. Yeah, pick your jaws off the floor. What is going on here? The 101 Charizard. I suppose the idea is that with Shinobi Blade and Quick Search, you can make all sorts of combos happen. It's pretty hilarious that the type coverage of Greninja might just be randomly getting better as well, with Don making a comeback. This one, yeah, this one's wild. Really, really awesome list. Congrats on the result. Andrew Choi was our highest placing Archaludon player, and utilizing the Starmie that I think Azul was popularizing, where you just have the extra damage counter placement because the math on the Metal Defender is pretty poor. So oftentimes you need those counters to push you over into KOs, which is a pretty smart solution. I think previous solutions have been just having tool damage mods. But in this build, you get to utilize Prime Catcher, which is, always a great selling point. And Starmie does just have great synergy with Night Stretcher, which then makes Pokestop and Greninja. Like, all of these are just better cards that get you into Metal Defender as quickly as possible, but also just, has synergy with this recursion of your Stage 1 line. Gantner was our highest placing Lost Zone box player. I really like the 60 as well. Pretty streamlined, has the 9 energy in here, so you are technically still able to use that Moonlight Shuriken, but it's a lot of resource management in terms of these energies with flower selecting. I really like that he's forced in the Poké Gear as well as the 4 Pokestop. He's really crowbarred as much consistency as you can possibly fit into this list, which I think is really welcomed for Lost Zone box. There was also a top 64 build of Archaludon, but this time with Dialga V-Star, trying to get that powerful Star Chronos attack off. What more can you say about Dialga at this point? We know what it's trying to do at this stage, right? This does feel a little bit less explosive than something like Metang, but definitely a more consistent option. And at the very least, you have a consistent turn to attack from Archaludon anyway, so you can set the tempo, and then maybe you can have those gotcha moments with Dialga at some point in the game. Gouging Fire also got a top 4 placement. I think the new inclusion being that Koraidon, just like we saw from Roaring Moon, as another new, strong single prize option. The other thing that I see is 4 Pokemon catchers in the 60, something that is very different from Luke's initial build, trying to really add that gunslinger element to Gouging Fire in just taking those 2 prizes as and where you can find them. Gouging Fire, interestingly, doesn't have to care about Pikachu either because it has Fluttermane and Monkey Dory that can still help you get one-shots there. So this is still an intact aggressive archetype. Looks like a lot of the Snorlax and controlling players did have high placements, but not getting to the very top of our tables, although they are smuttering around that top 64 128 threshold. Definitely becoming scarier archetypes in my eyes if Lugia is going to be falling off the radar that little bit more, and we're going to start seeing more Latias EX base builds. People are just going to have less switch cards, and that's generally a good thing for Snorlax. Charlie Lockyer got a top 128, once again utilising that precious trolley. It's becoming my favourite ace bet by far, because you know that the other 59 cards are nonsense, and the trolley just makes the nonsense make sense, and in this case it's bringing back the Ancient Wisdom. Really, really creative engine here as well. Obviously you have Greninja synergy, but you also have insane Trekking Juice synergy here, where the Cypher, I imagine, is going to go energy then the card you actually want to draw, because this is in part going to be your filtering system to get those basic energy, and your Luminous certainly, into the discard pile early to utilise for your attackers. Of course, the key selling point here is Grass Metal Lightning allows you to attack with Pikachu EX, which is a really dangerous new attacker. And the Water Energy, no, they're not for Regice, they're for the Radiant Greninja, so you can have some very powerful sniping pressure. Hydreigon did manage a top 128 placement. It had a 101 line of the Pidgeot, and it was the list that had the mini-controlling package of the Zerosix, Machinations, as well as Eerie. It's definitely one of those strange archetypes that sometimes it can play the role of a controlling deck, sometimes it's trying to checkmate with its Obsidian attack. I still feel like it has somewhat of an identity crisis, but it's cool to see that some players have made it work despite its inconsistencies. I thought I was done with the headlines, but I scrolled down low enough to see a Toadscruel Alone Executor deck. I'm trying to figure this one out on the fly. Yeah, these gamers are just really out here having fun. One cool thing to bear in mind is that the combination of Toadscruel and Toadscruel EX does cover a number of matchups. If there's going to be Golden Go coming back, even Regidrago to an extent is really afraid of this ability. Low-key, it's quite hilarious that this combination is coming up. Yeah, this one's wild. Oh man, only in Pokemon, eh? And I've scrolled even further, there's also a brilliant Blender United Wings deck. Oh, you'll love to see it. It's even playing one Duskball. I salute you. What a way to wrap things up. There we have it, the Sacramento Regional Championship. Stuttgart is on the way. We have to react to a Miraidon finals, which might put a bit of fear into the Regidrago players, perhaps. It might also inspire some Bolton Charizard coming back into the mix. If you're previously a Lugia player, where's your head at? Are you afraid of this wave of Miraidon possibly returning to the formats? Terrapagos, are you going to be going down the new Poison package with Trolley, or are you going to be sticking true with Dustoir and Pidgeot? And low-key, some of the ancient decks had a really good showing just with that addition of the one Koraidon, so that's definitely a sleeper card for the format right now. Let me know your thoughts down below. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow for another video. Cheers.